My original goal was to play all Final Fantasy main series titles for the first time. So far I've played the pixel remasters of 1 through 4, and on the whole I've had decent fun, with 4 being my current favorite of the bunch. Now a dilemma I've had since this idea's inception is, what do I do with side games and sequels? Sequels like 10-2, I decided fairly early on that they counted, but that spin-offs like Tactics, for as fun as I hear they are, would be saved for another time. What I was more stuck on were games more directly connected to the main series, something like Crisis Core. It's not a main series title, but its lore impacts it. I ended up putting it off thinking I wouldn't have to decide for a while, but then I was informed that Final Fantasy IV actually has a side sequel, The After Years. I set it as a stream goal figuring I'd let that decide, and it turns out I met that goal before the goal to play 5, so here we are. Originally a mobile game that came out in Japan in 2008, it's probably better known as a PSP title where it was released in 2011 as a part of the Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection containing the original game, The After Years, and a brand new story called Interlude, which is a short game that connects the other two titles together. This has been the only time Interlude's been released. I didn't know it existed until starting to make this video, but after playing Taze and reading the plot synopsis for Interlude, I feel content in saying that I'm probably not missing much, and I'm not really looking for more Final Fantasy IV at this time, thank you very much. And with that comment, let me get the big question out of the way up front. Did I have fun playing The After Years? No, not really. Now you may be thinking, but wait, 4 is your current favorite, what gives? And I'll tell you what gives, by breaking out a game that decided to continue a story 17 years after its conclusion. This is Final Fantasy IV, The After Years. So the biggest difference right off the bat to what I've seen in Final Fantasy so far is that this is an episodic game. An overarching big event is indeed transpiring, but during each tale you take control of a different character as they do their part to face the conflict the world once again finds itself in. Almost every character that gets its own tale were from the OG squad of 4, so a lot of familiar faces here. Sometimes one tale will briefly cross over into another, but for the most part everyone has gone their own way during the 17-year gap between FF4 and this. After all, several became rulers and parents, so it's not as easy to get together anymore. You make all the plans, but someone always dibs at the last second. I usually would describe the story now, but in this situation, I want to first go over how the game works. You walk, you auto-battle, the plot tells you to keep going, then you backtrack, rinse, and repeat. Yeah, I hate to be that person, but I really do be that way. Despite most tales being only 2 to 3 hours long, they padded this game so well that I would let it catch my fall from a 50-foot drop. You walk, and walk, and walk, also battle mobs, and walk some more. You'll be asked to go through a dungeon in order to reach a small plot point or destination just outside it, and then after some exposition be asked to go back the way you came to report what you found, or something. Gone are teleporter pads waiting for you at the end of dead-end caves. The teleport spell still exists, but in several instances it was inaccessible for use and I had to walk all the way back, even when there wasn't upcoming plot that I'd skip by leaving instantly. I really can't stress enough how bored this made me. My theory for the backtracking was that since this was a finite world to work in, and 9 or so characters needed to share it, they had to contain each one to a small area to at least make each tale geographically unique, though that refreshment only lasts about an hour or so each time, if that. Due to all characters needing concise gameplay between them, there are no new mechanics added during the story, so not only do your locales get stale, but your actions as well. Bands are what I'd consider to be the only exception. As main characters within a party spend more time together and form stronger relationships, they get team attacks called bands. These are high-costing magic abilities that deal big damage when used. Once initiated, that character, along with any others involved, begin to charge up the move. This often makes them inconvenient considering how small parties usually are. All involved characters also give up MP to make this happen, so as powerful as some of them are, they are definitely an investment in time and resources. One I didn't often use, if I'm being honest. There were some fights where I would spam it, but I often opted to keep my party freed up for healing and items instead. Some bands wouldn't be that much stronger, or be even weaker, than a high-leveled super effective magic attack, so yeah, a bit underwhelming at times. A new passive mechanic is how the phases of the moon affect combat. There are 4 phases that follow a cycle: new, waxing, full, and waning. Depending on which phase is currently active, one type of battle command will become half as effective while another is doubled. these being black magic, white magic, skill abilities, and attack abilities. Bands, depending on their attributes, can also be affected by the moon as well. The phase of the moon will change when you sleep in a tent, cottage, or inn, and also automatically after 30 minutes of playtime. Some enemies will only appear during a certain moon phase. You are always able to check the phase and its effects in the menu, as well as during battle, where the battle command heightened will be colored green, with the nerfed one in red. Because it's so easy to change the moon phase, I would often sleep repetitively to make sure I had one I favored before heading into a big battle. In this way, I think it kind of makes the whole mechanic pointless, though I understand where they were going with this. But if you think I'm going to fight a big bad with a white magic weekend, you must be new around here. So, the story. Like I said earlier, it's one you tackle episode by episode, so that's what I'm going to do here as well. Initially, when starting a new game, Ceodore is the only one available, so that's as good a place to start as any. Ceodore is the child of Cecil and Rosa. He's a good kid, but is frustrated that people expect great things from him because of his parents. He wants to be acknowledged based on his own merits and achievements rather than what he may have inherited. Currently, he's working on taking his night test to join the Red Wings. He's accompanied by 2 soldiers, Wedge, who likes him, and Biggs, that doesn't. 2 names that I'm sure will never come up again in any Final Fantasy game ever. In making his way through the trial, a big monster appears which we defeat by awakening to a new power wholly his own. Flying back towards Baron, the ship becomes overwhelmed by monsters and gets brought down. We finally get an acknowledgement from Biggs, since that's what one does with their final breaths, but he, Wedge, and everyone else on the ship that wasn't Ceodore ends up being killed from the crash, dramatically making him the last of the true Red Wings. With our plot armor firmly intact, a strange hooded man joins up with us and we go to Mysidia. Porom is there and assigns us a generic white mage and black mage to help us get through Death's Road so that we can get to Baron. Speaking of Baron, things aren't going so well there either. Monsters have started wreaking havoc, and while Rosa and Cid do what they can, Cecil sends them away for their own safety. He notices a second moon in the sky and wonders about Golbez, but then is confronted by a green-haired girl who has taken mastery over Bahamut. She comments on the limitations of a half-breed such as himself before appearing to defeat Cecil. Cut to Rydia, who is speaking with the king and queen of the Feymark, but they abruptly teleport her away just before the same green-haired girl arrives. She proceeds to petrify the rulers. Ceodore, meanwhile, is in Baron, but due to very obvious mind control nonsense, the guards do not seem to recognize their prince and won't let him pass. So we get the waterway key from Cid's daughter and sneak our way in. The mages opt to leave to report these sketchy plot points to Mysidia, and Ceodore and Hoodsey split up to look for Cecil. Hoodsey finds him first, but Cecil doesn't seem to recognize him, even though it seems like he should, and tells him to go away. Ceodore reunites with Hoodsey, upset that there is no one to be found, and Hoodsey reinforces this idea rather than tell him the truth. He has them leave under the reasoning that Ceodore can't see his father like this. Ceodore's next plan is to see if he can find Cid's ship, the Enterprise, in case they were able to get out. Hoodsey tags along, talking about how he has to defeat a dragoon, to which Ceodore and the audience suspect means Kain, and the chapter ends. This story took about 3 hours and 40 minutes to finish, but now that it's done, most of the other episodes become free to do in whatever order you want. I personally just worked my way down the list. Jan is being counseled about suspicious activity going on in Baron, but, in what will become a very prevalent theme, has full belief in Cecil and finds himself unconcerned. Just as well because he seems to have his own problems at home that need to be addressed. Jan's headstrong daughter Ursula has been a source of grief lately as she has been upset that Jan won't teach her martial arts. In her frustration, she runs away to Mount Hobbs on her own. She does pretty well, but of course her dad ends up jumping in to save her from a particularly nasty monster. Her reason for coming here was to investigate a fallen star, and didn't tell him because she knew he wouldn't have let her go if she had. While on the mountain, they find a grave marker for other Fabul monks who had come here in the recent past, but didn't make it. They go back to Fabul to find the Red Wings descending upon them. You'd think after what happened last time, they'd either lend all kingdoms the technology for airships, or just simply decommission the unit. Indeed, they seem to be led by Kain, who swears that he's actually evil this time, no funny tricks or anything like that, he promises pinky swears, and steals Fabul's crystal. Ah yes, the crystals again. Now thinking that perhaps Baron is doing something sus after all, Jan decides to go and is convinced to take Ursula along as well. 75% of their interactions during this whole episode is her asking to go with him places, and he's saying no, and sometimes she doesn't get to go, and sometimes she does anyway. Riveting. This doesn't get old ever. While sailing to Baron, they run into Edward's boat, who is heading there as well, but we lose him as our ship begins to take damage from monsters. Guess Edward just doesn't feel like helping us, causing us to pull over to a nearby island so that we may make repairs and find supplies. Jan heads out on his own but doesn't return, so Ursula and some rando monks go after him. The next long while is the game switching back and forth between the two of them wandering the jungle needlessly while having flashbacks to Ursula's birth and upbringing. They end up finding each other and fight a big boss together. Ursula learns a new move, and this is what finally convinced Jan to train her. And of course, now I get to backtrack the way back to the ship with no additional plot happening. They get back on course, but a giant whirlpool appears, and their fate is left hanging. This episode took a little over 2 hours. The Blue Planet's most eligible bachelor has since taken on 4 students under his wing. With the feeling of crisis in the air, he sends each of them out to a different part of the world to scout out any funny business. Gecko goes to Mount Hobbs, but this is before Jan and Ursula had gone, because we now see that those dead monks had in fact been killed by the green-haired girl. Zangetsu tries to blend in with the dwarves, but his lack of jumping and saying lolly ho was not doing him any favors. After seeing that Babel is on the fritz, we go through the mine to get back to the overworld, concerned by the creatures we encountered within. Izayoi, meanwhile, is disguised as an E-pop trainee in Troria. She's suspicious as to why they're trying to find a new E-pop so bad, and the fact that they've gone and built a giant training tower to assist in that. We scale the tower, get another glance at Babel glitching, and come down. And lastly, Sukanoa is hiding as a Mysidia Black Mage trainee. We get ourselves turned into a toad, something that took me too long to figure out, so that we can listen in on a meeting to tell us what to do next. That something is to follow Porom up Mount Ordeals, but at yet another glance at Babel, we decide that reporting back is the best thing to do. Edge himself heads to the infamous Babel, where he is gradually rejoined by everyone. As we climb, we see the grave of Edge's dad, Ripperoni Pepperoni, and start to see images of Rubicant, one of the elite bad from FF4, that last the rest of the episode. At the top of Babel is the green-haired girl again, and despite all the dead people in Edge's life telling him to have a sense of self-preservation, he confronts her anyway, only having to retreat as she summons Ifrit. A chase ensues, and in the room where Cid's airship had once been long ago, she tells him that by order of Cecil, she is gathering the crystals for Baron. In a literal leap of faith, they all jump into the abyss and are indeed caught by Cid's airship at the bottom. This tale took about 3 hours and 20 minutes, but having a single party member for most of the time lends itself to be mostly auto battles. Though to be fair, so did Jan's, and, spoiler alert, almost every other episode. Edward is also a bachelor, but with him still grieving over his old girlfriend, he has lent the type of leniency that Edge isn't so lucky in receiving. Though what Edward does have is his secretary Harley, who basically manages everything for him. She decided to go investigate that same meteor that Ursula was interested in, but takes too long to return, so he goes after her, and they find a suspicious-looking crash site indeed. On the way back, the Red Barons drop in to tell them that the crash site is now under Baron jurisdiction. Finding it odd that Cecil didn't deliver this message himself, they decide, like everyone else, to go to Baron for answers. Once in Kaipo, Harley comes down with desert fever, causing us to go back through all the caves we had to go through to get here in the first place, to get a sand pearl on a full moon, so that we can then go through all these caves a third time to get it to her. On the boat to Baron, we contemplate the appearance of the second moon, and then run across Jan's ship like we did from his story. And yes, while they do acknowledge that Jan's ship falls behind, they don't contemplate helping him whatsoever. We actually make it to Baron and actually talk to Cecil. Finally, someone managed to do it. Edward is very wary of this interaction, and the two exchange gifts. A small box for Edward, and Damsey and flowers for Cecil. On the boat ride back, Edward reveals that within those flowers was a special flower that allows one to hear those near it from a great distance. Our way of spying on Cecil, or, as Edward suspects, whoever it is that's pretending to be Cecil. Our small box, however, is to never be opened. But we then run into presumably the same whirlpool that Jan had run into, and the episode cliffhangs there as well. Original. Well, this episode took just under 3 hours to finish, and while there was less talking in this one, there was more backtracking than ever before. Plus, there was no big bosses to fight, so I never ended up using he and Harley's band. Rydia pays a visit to the king and queen of the Feymark, but gets told off for no longer being welcome there. Then, as Sumi saw before, Rydia is sent to wages before the arrival of the green-haired girl. Rydia returns only to find that everyone in the place has gotten petrified, not just the king and queen. She goes to the dwarves, but the Red Wings have taken their dark crystal. Rydia and Luca, the dwarf king's daughter, with her same necklace she had from back in FF4, go to the sealed cavern to get the last dark crystal that hadn't yet been stolen, only for the green-haired girl to show up and steal it. In a shocking twist, we decide to go to Baron. But on the Falcon, we are shot down by the Red Wings and are in need of repairs. Titan shows up, and either triggered by how close to death the party was, or by damage dealt to the Titan, we're saved by the Man in Black, and Babel does its light show for like the 5th time. At about 3.5 hours, this was the hardest tail by far. Enemies had all kinds of draining moves, met party members, and a hard boss fight. Many game overs happened here. Troria has requested someone to come and train Lenora, an aspiring Epop. The Elder, who seems to be in poor health and so reluctant on making Palom a sage, appoints him for the job instead of Porom despite his speciality being in black magic. We and Lenora go through that big training tower they've built, and as they proceed, he teaches her the basic black magic spells. While initially disinterested in her in the job, he starts to become more friendly as they go, while she remains determined yet uncertain. The goal of the tower is to reach the top and read the plinth, and so once they do, they head back. Palom questions why they're trading Epops in combat, and learns that they have reason to suspect Baron is coming for their Earth Crystal. Like everyone else, Palom's initially skeptical and doesn't believe it. But sure enough, they come for it, and he and Lenora escape with the crystal through the Troria waterway. They then take a black chocobo to get to that infamous magnetic cavern, and eventually make it to its crystal room, but the bad guys catch up to them and release that dark elf from last time. You know, the one that hated music? All looks lost, but the green-haired girl shows up and shivas him into oblivion. She then tries to take the crystal, but in a move we've seen before, Palom petrifies himself, this time with the crystal in hand. She's about to shatter him to get it, but Lenora uses Basuna despite not knowing the spell as a party member, and despite the fact that didn't work 17 years ago. The power of flashbacks, we learn that Lenora is a childhood friend of Palom that he didn't recognize. Through the power of anime friendship, this realization causes them to learn an OP band. But too bad, green-haired girl is even more OP, so she summons Shiva again and one-shots them to take the crystal. Elsewhere in the world, Porom appears to be with Kain as she feels a disturbance in the Force. This episode was about 3 hours long, but that was enough. 3 dungeons back-to-back was a total drag, and Lenora was at first just terrible, though she did eventually stabilize. I did end up liking Palom better by the end, despite him acting like an angsty piece of shit, even though he should be in his late 20s at the youngest, despite others treating him like he was younger, like calling him a brat. We start with 2 major flashbacks, the first taking place shortly after the events of FF4. Palom talks about wanting to be a sage and leads Porom to the underground waterway where a big monster lives. This monster was the biggest pain, and it seems the only way to beat it, other than grinding, is to just attack the head and leave the tentacles alone, because they just regenerate right away anyway. So, fuck those mechanics, I guess. Their band is strong, but takes 30 years to charge. In the end, they win, and Palom is pleased, but Porom thinks he needs to think about how he wants/needs to use his magic. It's for this reasoning that the Elder didn't believe he was ready to leave Mysidia before this point. The second flashback, probably at most a few years before the present, they go to visit Rydia and stop by the Dwarven Kingdom. Palom is awkward around Luca, though she seems to talk about him to her dad fondly. Rydia takes the 2 of them to just before the entrance to the Feymark, a place Palom really wants to go to, but she tells them that going in would put them out of sync with human time and goes in herself. She returns shortly after, looking pretty gloomy, and won't let them go in. Perhaps this is the visit where the king and queen initially told her not to come back anymore. Back at the present, Porom is bummed that Palom went to Troria and she's been left behind. But in all this hoopla, her time has finally come, for the Elder sends her and a rando black mage and white mage to Mount Ordeals to find Kain. She does find him when he does come down the mountain, but since he's evil now, he's decided to work with the green-haired girl. He'll give her crystals in exchange for being taken to Cecil so that he can kill him. Porom makes a surprised Pikachu face in response. Clocking in at about 2.5 hours, it's shorter compared to the other episodes, but that also made it more tolerable. I just thought it was strange that 2/3 of a story titled Porom's Tale had more to do with her brother than her. Makes you think they didn't know what to do with her, but had to give her a tale out of obligation. An interesting aspect of this tale is that it often switched between Kain and Ceodore/Hoodsie. Sometimes this was fine, but other times the pacing was really choppy. Just getting that out there from the start. For example, we reaffirm Kain's murderous desires. Ceodore and Hoodsie get a better scope of what's going on and try to catch up. And then we're back to Kain, who has gone to Damson Castle to take their crystal. Very much flip-floppy. But in any case, Kain severely injures Edward and kidnaps Rosa, who has been hiding there. Unsurprisingly, part of the reason he wants to kill Cecil is that so Rosa can be all his. Great. Just great. Everyone, including Sid, meets up at Baron, and we learn that Kain confronted himself at the Mount Ordeals monument like Cecil did last game, but he lost, causing his dark side to be running rogue, i.e. the Kain we've been following thus far. As it turns out, Hoodsie is actually Kain. It's basically a whole Vanitas situation.
Brother.
Kain defeats him and unlocks his original form, similar to how Cecil became a paladin. I love how the game's own dialogue made such a big deal about Kain being evil for realsies this time, so much so that I couldn't take it seriously, only to reveal that, well, it is true, but, also isn't true. That is Kain, it's not an imposter per se, but neither the party or the game really try to sell him as the true Kain after the twist has been revealed. A whole, you're evil so it doesn't count kind of thing. Very strange. Though Dark Kain does have a few good lines, like how the soldiers being controlled should still have a sense of self-preservation, and telling Dark Cecil to stop being dramatic, he's not going to die. On the flip side, Ceodore is really bad in battle. He and Hoodsie had to fight the same Kraken thing that chibi Porom Palom did, and it took several tries. At this point, retreading the same dungeons over and over across these tales has become very tedious and frustrating. Other than the Dark Kain reveal, basically nothing happened because we needed several points of recap to explain why Kain was popping up all over the place in other tales, so the fact that this tale was only a little over 2 hours long was a blessing. Let's ship to the moon for a bit. Golbez, yeah, remember that guy? Wakes up from stasis and has to go up 12 flights of stairs to reach the Crystal Palace, where the crystals seem to now be red in color. Fusoya shows up and joins the party as we go investigate Bahamut's place, but it seems that he has been sealed in another dimension, which is remarkable considering who he is. A meteor has also crashed nearby, so we go to investigate. It seems to be eating away at the land, which only brings up more questions for the one that crashed on the blue planet. Green-haired girl shows up talking about the crystals, and for the first time we actually have to beat her. See, throughout the whole game there have been several scripted fights with her where you weren't actually meant to win. Initially I assumed this was going to be the same spiel until the game over screen told me otherwise. This time she summoned Asura. Concerned for the crystals, they head back to check on them, but predictably she shows up being like, "Tee-hee, thanks for leading me here, morons," and we have to fight her again. She brings out Leviathan this time, and thankfully this encounter wasn't nearly as challenging. But after we defeat her again, things get weird as an identical green-haired girl shows up saying that us and the crystals are no longer necessary, and takes off with the green-haired girl we defeated. Now concerned for all the other Lunarians still in stasis, they go to check in on them, but by the time they get there all the crystals have shattered, releasing Zeramus's malice. Zeramus, you may recall, was the big bad of FF4. A fight ensues, but it isn't too bad. However, his malice isn't going down that easily, so in a moment where all looks bleak, Cluya's spirit summons the lunar whale, Cluya being the father of Cecil Golbez, which Fusoya takes advantage of by teleporting Golbez onto while remaining behind, sacrificing himself to finish off the malice. On Golbez's long journey to the blue planet, he does a bit, and by a bit I mean a lot, of introspection. He recalls his dark days as a villain of FF4, and works his way backwards until he's a child named Ceodore, who one day started hearing the voice that set him upon his dark path. At about 2 hours and 45 minutes, this episode has a lot of padding, like so many others, in regards to just walking through the same areas repetitively. Golbez is a cool character and it was nice to see him again, but he isn't enough to make this as engaging as you'd want it to be. This is it. The final episode. Everyone now has to come together to save the planet from whatever exactly this threat actually is. I mean, there's green-haired girls? That are causing mayhem and stealing crystals, but what's her goal exactly? Why are the Adolins under her orders? Babel being weird, the second moon? There's a lot of things going on here, but we need those final bits of plot to hopefully bring it all together. Speaking of the moon, Rydia, Luca, Edge, and Golbez notice that the moon is turning red as falling meteors start to cause a lot of damage to the planet. Like everyone else in this game, they try to enter Baron, but an Adolin's force field prevents them. They then fly to Mist, where the spirit of Rydia's mother decides that the game needs to be a little less cryptic, and tells them saving the other Adolins from their mind control will weaken the gate. Fun fact, I was already finding these guys around before I even realized this was the purpose of doing so. I didn't actually realize I was supposed to go to Mist until I looked up a guide because I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next. As a result, I did this section a bit backwards, but for the sake of flow, this is more or less how it would go. After leaving Mist and traveling around, you eventually get to Kaipo, where Jan and Ursula are being attended to by the same doctors who took care of Hurley during her bout of desert fever. It was seen that they survived their wayward encounter and had washed up on shore. To wake them, they go to Sheila, Jan's wife, who gives the party a ladle and a frying pan. Giving Ursula the ladle and hitting Jan with the frying pan makes them all better for some reason. I don't really remember why, honestly. And they join the party. Troria is under siege by Shiva, who has covered it in ice. Defeating her brings the summon back to Rydia, thaws the city, and soon after Palom and Lenora join up as well. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Evelyn is on fire due to Ifrit. Ed tries to take on Ifrit alone, but of course fails because, well, duh. The spirit of Rubicant whispers sweet nothings and hints to Edge, and together with Rydia, they literally beat fire with fire and defeat/regain Ifrit. Rama is defeated in Mysidia and is also refined Porom. Agart, meanwhile, is where Titan is, but when you try to fight him, he opens a hole in the ground the party always falls into. I was stuck on this for a while, not realizing that I was missing an interaction that causes Porom to appear and cast Float, making the hole no longer an issue. After gaining Titan, the party heads to Mist, where the Mist Dragon finally rejoins Rydia. In Baron, Ceodore, Kain, Rosa, Edward, and Cid finally confront Cecil, as well as Odin. Odin eventually comes to his senses and is able to knock Cecil from his possession. Obviously, we all had known Cecil wasn't just evil now out of his own volition. Even the party wasn't that dumb. Another fight with the, green-haired girl occurs, and while the party is victorious, many more show up to tell them they are waiting on the true moon. The party takes the lunar whale and chases after them. They arrive on the true moon, but Cecil has seen better days. The possession seems to have taken quite the toll, leaving him in a state of questionable awareness. This also matches some of my questionable awareness of the story at this point. We go back to the crystal room, and I'm not sure if the crystals in it are the ones that were stolen from the blue planet, or if the ones that shattered reformed, and if they aren't the shattered ones, does that leave any other lasting consequences other than malice running amok? For the record, I started playing this in April, and it is now the week of Thanksgiving, so it's just probably me. Don't even worry about it, it's just probably me. Regardless, this crystal room contains a fight with Dark Knight Cecil. He tries to kill everyone one by one, but good guy Cecil protects them. When DK Cess finally turns his attention to GG Cess, Golbez steps in to take the strike. Now, about this scene here. Usually I don't like spoilers when I'm playing something for the first time, however, there are indeed exceptions. For instance, with my permission, I was informed that the party makeup for this fight had a lasting consequence. Not wanting to miss out or get a bad ending, especially when I have no plans to ever play this game again, I asked what party I should have for the good outcome, but to be kept in the dark as to why. And I'm glad I did. The strike Golbez takes is permanently fatal unless your party contains Golbez, Ceodore, Cecil, and Rosa during this fight. The whole family, essentially. If I had killed Golbez, I would have been quite upset. One, because he's strong, and two, because I just think he's a neat character, and I'm not emotionally used to that Fire Emblem permadeath shit. With Cecil back to his full strength, the green-haired girl is back for another fight, with Bahamut. Whether Bahamut joins you or not depends on whether you've gone through the trouble of gaining Asura and Leviathan. I had indeed done this, but I don't think I realized that they were prerequisites for Bahamut until right now. More clones show up and reveal that the green-haired girl's name is actually Maynard. The party then finds a child named Maynard, who seems predisposed to taking orders. After having her unlock the door preventing their progress, they tell her to be a good girl and stay put. And finally, at long last, they find the big bad, the Creator. The Creator is the last of their own kind to at one time were a thriving species but ultimately destroyed themselves. Once alone, it started experiments on evolution and created crystals, which are then planted upon planets containing the potential of life so that they may record its history. The Creator was also responsible for the Maenads, who had then tasked with collecting the crystals. But like so many others, the species of the Blue Planet were deemed unworthy and in need of eradication. Not appreciating their planet being devoured by moons and meteors, the party takes them on. My final squad contained Golbez, Rosa, Edge, Kain, and Rydia. This fight is 5 phases long, and while phases 1, 2, and 3 are quick to learn, phase 4 is a whole different story. On my first try, I didn't even get an attack in before I was dead and had to start again. It's bad enough going through all the phases every time, but also all the exposition it dumps on us. A skip cutscene button would have been greatly appreciated, but the big problem was that I was underleveled. So underleveled in fact that I couldn't even grind. Unless I did a huge amount of backtracking to get out of the dungeon, or at least towards the earlier parts of it, clones of Maynard show up and just kill my party. The guy I referenced recommended being around level 70, but I was still in my 50s. Pretty yikes. So I had 2 choices. Keep trying, or leave. I chose to keep trying. After a long slog, I finally made it to phase 5, but I was not feeling great. I had been streaming for a very long time at this point, and the idea of dying on phase 5 and doing phase 4 again after all that work was very discouraging. I'm not ashamed to admit that I paused the game to look up a guide for this, but the game does throw you a bone and heals your party for this last bit. I actually beat this final phase on the first try, and I had not felt such relief in a long time. But it was short-lived because, the moon is now exploding and we gotta get out of here. Child Maynard is still waiting like we told her, and with mixed feelings, the party decides to take her with them. The creature pursues them as they run, but the encounters aren't major, though reversing your party formation is a good idea. And Maynard clones appear to protect the party, ultimately finishing off the creator for good, who thanks the party before perishing. And from here is the usual epilogue stuff. Something I've neglected to mention is that during our time on the moon, different combinations of party members often had little asides where they could develop their characters and learn more advanced to make it easier for players to use whatever combination they wanted. Some of these were actually pretty nice. Ceodore and Golbez get to have their first uncle-nephew conversation, and Ceodore throughout this journey has learned to embrace his heritage rather than thinking of it as a crutch. And while this happened before arriving on the moon, Luca and Lenora confront the awkward fact that they both have a crush on Palom, for some reason, with Luca being the one to gracefully bow out. Once back from the moon, Lenora is offered a Nepop position which she declines due to sharing Porom's dream of becoming a sage. Porom and Palom are made joint rulers of Mysidia. Giot, Luca, Cid, and Mid, Cid's grandson, get to work on trying to power an airship with the crystal's magic. Jan starts to train Ursula. Edward gets a spirit visit from Tella and Anna. Rydia has taken out Raisin Maynard, who has been renamed, wait, how do you say this?
Cuore.
Sure, why not? Edge, as per usual, is kind of doing his own thing, though he seems to have taken an interest in Rydia and...
Cuore.
Kain is now the leader of the Red Wings and tasks Ceodore with helping the world rebuild from the meteor damage, and Rosa and Cecil think of Golbez, who took off in the lunar whale in search for the Lunarians. But the crystals! Up until this point, they have been thought of as perhaps more mystical in nature, but have now been revealed to have been manufactured to judge their right to existence. Several characters reflect on what this revelation could and should mean for how they view the crystals going forward, and I think that's a smart question. In the end, they all come to the same conclusion, that there's no harm in just keeping everything the same as it was before. Protecting their powers and holding them in high regard has become ingrained in their culture, and rather than upheave it, it wouldn't do any harm just to leave things for the sake of the balance they've all come to abide by. It's not a dramatic answer, but perhaps a wise one, ultimately. Now, you might have noticed how long this took to describe. Granted, I did throw in a few extra details for this final chapter, but even that aside, all the episodes up to this point, with I think the exception of Ceodore's, have been beatable in under 4 hours. I knew this episode was supposed to be longer than the others, so I was thinking maybe 6? 8 at most? No. This took 11 hours. 11 hours! Now, that wouldn't have been so bad, except for the fact that I had gone into the stream ready to beat it in one go, thinking that it would take way less time. But it just kept going, and going. I was so very spent by the time it was done. The scariest part was being at the final boss, thinking that after coming all this way, it just may not be possible with my current setup. Have a snippet from that stream. I have to go back and do all the phases if I die, don't I? Maybe if I continue, I can just jump into phase 3, question mark? Like, what is this? Okay, forget it. I didn't even get a chance. I didn't even attack him. I didn't even get a chance to hit him. Where do we end up? Yeah, back fucking here. I mean, Edge is right there on a cusp of a level. I guess Rosa is too. Maybe I fight a couple fights? I don't know if one level is going to suddenly keep people awake for longer than a single turn. I'm about to kick someone in the teeth. Thank you. I can't even grind. Alright, fuck you guys. I may not be able to actually physically beat this. And I'm real upset about it, because I've been sitting here for 11 hours, wanting to beat this game, and all of a sudden Final Fantasy's gotta do that thing it always does, where all of a sudden, the boss is way too hard, even though I've done all it's ever asked me to. Oh god. What if I fuck it up somehow? What if it's not the end? What if it doesn't let me save? I don't know what to do. I don't feel happy, I just feel scared. But I killed the mutant space puffer fish. Would I ever play this again? No. Am I happy I played it at all? I don't know. I saw it real quick before it went away. It took 11 hours. Apparently, I spent almost 2 hours getting game overs and attempting to beat bosses. I am over this. So hard. I am over this. By the way, if you want to watch me go through this journey so you can see my angst as it happened, I encourage you to pop on over to my second channel, Rising Feathers Plays, link below, where I have an edited version of this playthrough, as well as the other Final Fantasy playthroughs amongst other things. As for this channel, we need less than 100 subscribers before reaching that sweet 1,000 subscriber milestone, so if you thought that this was neat, maybe consider becoming part of the 1K family. At 1K, I'll be doing a Q&A video, so if you have any questions related to what I do here or just anything you're curious about in general, feel free to comment below. And finally, I stream this and any other games I play over on Twitch, link below for that as well, if that's something you're into. If you like Final Fantasy, I have a follower goal going to unlock Final Fantasy V, if you'd like to help with that. Right now I'm doing my first playthrough of Pokemon Violet, and it's been a lot of fun. Lastly, thank you all so very much for watching. It makes me feel fuzzy inside to see that people take time out of their days to watch something I made. It's still pretty wild to me, honestly. And with that, I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye!